Look, I think Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries are irredeemable at this point. I don't think they'll be able to tell Mondami in New York and his disciples that they voted to open the government.
The thing that we know to be true about Mike Johnson and House Republicans is that they haven't been given permission by their puppet master.
Schumer and Jeffries and their colleagues fear political retribution from the far-left activists in their party more than they fear the consequences of keeping the government closed for weeks on end.
Jeffries was just deemed irredeemable by Republicans, and the message hit in broad daylight as Trump's side struck back without hesitation. It was a declaration that Democratic leadership has crossed the point where negotiation is impossible, trapped in partisan obsession and ideological control. And now, with the government shutdown hanging in the balance, the country is seeing who is working to reopen America and who is willing to hold the nation hostage to protect their own political power.
The Democrats are eating up the clock. We have very important work to do here, and that's why we're pleading with them, not Chuck Schumer. Look, I think Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries are irredeemable at this point. I don't think they'll be able to.
It happened in a press conference that was supposed to be routine. But then Speaker Mike Johnson said the quiet truth out loud, calling Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries irredeemable, and everything in the room shifted. He wasn't raising his voice, he wasn't ranting, he was simply explaining why negotiations had stopped making sense. Democratic leadership wasn't delaying the process by accident. They were deliberately stalling, treating the shutdown like leverage instead of a problem to solve. At that moment, Johnson exposed what most of America had already started to feel. This isn't a disagreement over budgets, it's a leadership crisis.
So we're trying to appeal to a handful of moderates or centrists who care more about the American people and will put the people's interests over their own and do the right thing in the Senate. I mean, there's no point in me sitting down with Chuck Schumer. He's painted himself into a corner.
And once the word was spoken, it became impossible to walk back. Republicans had already voted to keep the government open. They had already placed the funding framework on the table. The only thing stopping the lights from turning back on was Democratic leadership choosing delay over duty, politics over people. Johnson's statement hit because it wasn't dramatic, it was accurate, and the accuracy is what rattled them.
And we wanted to just have a simple exercise with you this morning to go through just a couple of important facts. There is such a staggering amount of gaslighting and false information.
Republicans moved first, and they moved clearly. They passed the continuing resolution, put the funding on the floor, and voted 14 times to reopen the government. 14 opportunities for stability. 14 chances to protect families, federal workers, small towns, and essential services. And every single time, it was Democrats who blocked it, stalled it, or buried it under procedural delay. The very people crying on television about hardship are the same ones voting to extend it.
To go through just a couple of important facts. There is such a staggering amount of gaslighting and false information that Democrats are engaging in right now.
This is why the word irredeemable hit with such force, because the math does not lie. The shutdown is not happening because Republicans refuse to fund the government. The shutdown is happening because Schumer and Jeffries refuse to allow the government to reopen unless their ideological demands were met. They are not acting like negotiators. They are acting like hostage takers who believe pain strengthens their bargaining position. They are betting that Americans will blame the side doing the work, not the side blocking it.
Schumer and Jeffries and their colleagues fear political retribution from the far-left activists in their party more than they fear the consequences of keeping the government closed for weeks on end. So he had to do it. He had to endorse socialism. He had to endorse Marxism, this dangerous ideology that has taken over the Democrat Party. That is what is motivating them. So it doesn't matter what we do in the House.
The turning point came when Johnson explained why negotiation is pointless, because Democratic leadership isn't operating from policy anymore, but from ideological capture. Hakeem Jeffries didn't endorse a mainstream Democrat in New York. He backed Mondami, a socialist activist whose entire platform is built on dismantling the very system Jeffries claims he wants to fix. That wasn't strategy, that was fear. Jeffries is watching the far left flank of his party circle his seat like vultures, and he is making decisions to protect himself, not the country.
They would spend $1.5 trillion of your taxpayer funds. Included in that is nearly $200 billion of taxpayer funds that they want to use to restore free health benefits to illegal aliens.
And it gets worse once you see what Democrats demanded in return for reopening the government. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a ransom note. They demanded $1.5 trillion in new spending, including $200 billion to restore free health care for illegal immigrants, billions for left-wing ideological projects overseas, and $500 million to bail out failing pro-Democrat media organizations. And buried inside their proposal was a $50 billion cut to rural hospitals, the exact facilities millions of working Americans depend on just to see a doctor. That is not policy leadership. That is ideological looting dressed up as governance.
Republicans are responsible for all this pain. It's just a nonsensical statement. It's a nonsensical statement because the fact is very clear. This is about math.
Johnson made it clear there's no point trying to negotiate with Schumer or Jeffries because they're not trying to reopen the government. Their strategy is simple: run out the clock and weaponize the shutdown as political leverage. That's why Johnson shifted the target. He's no longer speaking to the Democratic leadership. He's speaking to the handful of moderate Democrats who still answer to voters instead of activist pressure. 7 Democrats in the Senate could reopen the government today if they broke with Jeffries and Schumer. Those moderates know exactly what's happening. Their own leadership is prioritizing party power over public stability. The shutdown continues, not because there's no solution, but because Schumer and Jeffries refuse to allow one unless their ideological demands are met.
As their ransom for reopening the government, they want to cut $50 billion from the rural hospital fund that the Republicans just got signed into law on July 4th.
Democrats didn't block the funding bill because it was incomplete. They blocked it because it didn't include their ransom demands. They want $1.5 trillion in new spending, free healthcare for illegal immigrants, bailout money for failing left-wing media networks, and cuts to rural hospitals that millions of Americans depend on. This is not negotiation. This is a political price tag. Jeffries is willing to keep the government closed until those demands are met. That is not public service. That is extortion dressed up as policy.
We're in harm's way. Border Patrol agents, TSA, air traffic controllers, all federal workers. They voted to ensure that women, infants, and children nutrition programs continue and that SNAP benefits continue.
Jeffries didn't show leadership on CNN. He showed panic. He tried to claim Speaker Johnson was waiting for Trump's permission, but all that did was admit who actually sets the direction in American politics, and it isn't him. He can't produce unity in his own party, so he's attacking Republicans for having it. This shutdown isn't about policy. It's about fear inside the Democratic Party. Jeffries and Schumer are protecting their own careers from the socialist activists circling their seats, and the country is paying the price for their internal survival fight.
And that SNAP benefits continue to go to the American families who are in need. But by contrast, the Democrats have voted no every single time. And what is outrageous to us is that they have gone onto the Senate floor. Senate Democrats, they have voted no. They have voted to close the government.
Democrats aren't stumbling into this shutdown. They're using it like a weapon. Jeffries practically admitted it on air. The government stays closed until Republicans give them what they want. That means every missed paycheck, every frozen SNAP benefit, every hospital on the brink is leverage, not collateral damage. They are squeezing the country on purpose, betting Americans will break before their political machine does. This isn't governance. It's hostage politics in broad daylight, and they're smiling while doing it.
Republicans passed a clean continuing resolution. It was nonpartisan. It was a simple bill that would open the full government, and we could do that today. If they would pass that today, with zero strings attached, everything would be flowing again and the government would work.
And here's the part they're scared for you to realize. This shutdown could end tomorrow. Not next month. Not after another round of speeches. Tomorrow. All it takes is 7 Democrats in the Senate to break from Jeffries and Schumer and vote with Republicans to reopen the government. 7. That's it. And that's why Jeffries is spiraling. He's not fighting Republicans, he's fighting the cracks forming inside his own party. The moderates know exactly what's happening. The suffering isn't accidental, it's strategic, and they're the ones who will have to explain it to voters back home. So Jeffries has to hold them in line with fear, pressure, and pure political intimidation. Because the moment even a handful decide to put the country first, Schumer and Jeffries lose control.
Sitting there for 45 days is nearly identical to the one that they voted on in March. But shockingly, this is the big thing. In addition to their refusal to support the CR and reopen the government, the Democrats have had the audacity to also demand something new. They demanded $1.5 trillion with a T in new spending obligations in exchange for the simple funding resolution.
What makes this moment dangerous for Democrats is that the pressure isn't coming from Republicans anymore. It's coming from their own voters. People in swing districts, border towns, suburban counties, and working-class communities are watching prices rise and benefits freeze, while their leaders lecture on television. Those voters do not care about party loyalty or activist approval. They care about keeping their homes, feeding their families, and holding on to the stability they already worked for. And they are starting to ask a question Jeffries cannot afford to hear on camera. If Republicans already voted to reopen the government, then why haven't you? They can drag this out a little longer, but the pressure isn't on Republicans anymore. It's on the Democrats, who know the next crack in their own caucus doesn't just end the shutdown, it ends their control. And they know the next defection won't just reopen the government, it will expose who was holding it closed.